Well, hello there, little masters, and welcome to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, Shawn and I are hosting a long-expected party with a lot of special guests.
Not quite as big as a Baggins birthday party, though. We've got enough technical issues with 10 to 12. Forget 12 dozen. But West to Hall, my friends. I'm Shawn
Marchese. A gross
Marchese.
of listeners. We're lucky if we have a gross of listeners, actually.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple of gross hosts, so there's that.
Oh, well played.
West to Hall, my friends. I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Bob to my knob. I think it was the other way last time. Alan Sisto.
I think it was. Well, thank you, Shawn. Folks, tonight we are proud and grateful to be able to welcome several of our patrons to the Old Inn of Bree, where you're about to hear us once again put our reputations on the line for some unscripted Q&A. We have some guests online
Such as they
with
are.
us. Such as they are. I know, exactly. I was going to put air quotes around that, but
Yeah.
we have some guests online with us, and we've asked them to come with some of their very best questions. We have no idea what they're going to ask us, so Shawn and I are going to be answering their questions on the fly as best we can in our third Questions After Nightfall episode.
And in case you've forgotten why we call it that, remember old Harry Goatleaf, the gatekeeper in Bree, who says, "It's my business to ask questions after nightfall." Well, tonight it's our guest's business to ask us questions after nightfall, and it's our business to answer them.
And correctly, if at all possible. So, as with previous questions after...
That's the trick.
That is the trick. As with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from edits for coughs or time spent flipping through pages while we look for an answer, we're going to be presenting this as it was recorded live, so everything you hear in this show will have been recorded during this session.
And if you'd like to get in on the next one, go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be doing Questions After Nightfall episodes about every 3 months, and we'll be inviting patrons at the Elrond's honorarium tier and higher to join us.
It's just one of the many ways we're saying thank you to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to humiliate us publicly. Or, you know, if they're nicer, just ask questions to get to know us, your moderately entertaining hosts, a little bit better.
That's right. But before we jump into that, we've got one little housekeeping item, sort of a correction.
Amendment. Addendum.
A counterpoint. Let's call it a counterpoint.
Let's do that.
Back in episode 84, we talked about Thorin's harsh words on the mountain when he discovered Bilbo had handed over the Arkenstone to Bardin the Elven King.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the, take him if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him.
Oh, I definitely remember that. And as our listeners may recall, we were pretty critical of Thorin for this. We called him childish. I think I said it was like a 5-year-old. We accused him of capriciously throwing away his friendship with Bilbo like it was meaningless.
That's right. But one of our listeners, Joe Hoffman, who blogs about Tolkien and lots of other interesting things at his blog Idiosophy, and that's idiosophy.com. We'll put a link to that up on our show notes.
Sure.
He thinks we missed the gravity of that statement. So much so that he actually wrote a blog post on June 2nd called The Friendship of Kings as a rebuttal to our position on that.
We should be used to this by now. He shared a story about Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire, whose friendship was so important to Roman officials that when one of the provincial governors broke trust with him, all Augustus had to do was say publicly, "That man is no longer my friend." The governor was so shamed by the pronouncement, and probably, fearful for his political future, that he took his own life rather than live with the shame of falling from Augustus' friendship.
Yep, that's right. And Joe actually went on to observe that lots of Old English kennings for king have the word friend in them.
Mm-hmm.
And also that a certain fellow named Peregrine Took proclaimed himself as king's friend to some ruffians during the scouring of the Shire. And that actually had a pretty significant effect on them. It actually made them give way.
That's right.
In other words, Joe says Tolkien knew exactly what a king's friendship is worth, and we shouldn't be so quick to make light of Thorin's unfriending of Bilbo.
A very good point. Well, that is an excellent point, Joe, and we appreciate it. So consider us illuminated.
And let me add, in words that Caesar Augustus would understand, nostra culpa.
There you go. Well, now, without further ado, why don't we go ahead and introduce the folks joining us? I'm going to unmute each of you in order so that you can say hi to your fellow podcast listeners. Go ahead and let them know your name and where you're joining us from tonight. Christopher.
Hi, I'm Christopher, and I'm from Skokie, Illinois.
Very good. Thanks, Christopher. Next up is Sharat.
Hi, I'm Sharat, and I'm from Gaithersburg, Maryland.
Very good. And joining us, I guess, this is your third Q&A, right?
Third Q&A, that's right.
Wow, my goodness. In fact, that's probably something we should be asking folks to include, like how many times have they joined us or are they new to the show? So
that's a good idea, yeah.
Yeah. Next up, James.
Hi, I'm James. I'm from Gloucester, Virginia.
And this is your second one, right?
Yes, this is my second time here.
Very good. Next up is Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I am seething here in Austin, Texas. And I might have joined Patreon simply for the fact that I would be able to perhaps come here and chat with you and become somewhat famous. So, do it.
Ride our coattails, Emily. That's all right.
That's right.
There you go.
Those are very small coattails, so hang on tight. All right. Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn, and I'm right now in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, wow. We got another Texas
A lot
tonight.
of people in Texas tonight.
I guess so. And next up is Tamsin.
Hi, I'm Tamsin Barlow, and I'm from Rochester, Minnesota. And you think this would be easier because I've had so many imaginary conversations with you guys as I listened to the podcast. I thought, oh, this is going to be a breeze.
You've had several real conversations with us, too, just not voice to voice.
Yeah, just not voice to voice, so.
Well, we're glad you could join us tonight. Tim, you're next up.
Tim here in Wisconsin. Glad to be on the show again.
That's right. We have had you on before. I think you missed the last one, but you were on the first time around.
Definitely.
All right. And last up is Mark.
Hello, Alan. Hello, Shawn. Hello, everyone else. Hi, this is Mark, dialing in from San Antonio, and thrilled to be here. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and jump into your questions? So several of you have already raised your hands. Looks like first up we've got Emily, so
excellent.
Go right ahead.
Oh, so much pressure. I have to stump you guys.
You can give us an easy one.
Yeah, that's right. That is an
allowed.
Option. This is a universe in which that is a possibility.
Sure, that's an option. So, I've been thinking actually a lot. I think I started at the beginning of the podcast listening, and at that very first episode, there was a big discussion about how there's not allegory. Tolkien said, "Oh, no allegory. It's the wars in my novels are not World War I." The main exception for that is the story of his love of Edith and the Beren and Lúthien story.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they have Beren and Lúthien on their graves. So clearly, this is more than just a casual allegory. So I was looking into it a little bit, and I was thinking, well, so other than the fact that she danced for him and he loved her very much, well, how these huge things that are going on with Beren and Lúthien, how do they translate, or how does the Edith and J.R. story translate into Beren and Lúthien? And I noticed a couple things about Lúthien's life that we could look at. She was a Protestant. Her father disapproved of their union. Rather than getting her father's approval, J.R. just up and married her after waiting for a while. But I was thinking about the elfish loss of the serial longevity, loss of that elfishness, and I saw that Edith had converted to Catholicism, and that was a huge thing. And so maybe this is her loss, right? But where do we see kind of a comparable connection with Beren?
Oh, I see. If she's Lúthien, how is in what way is he Beren?
How is he Beren? Yep.
Wow,
that is an amazingly good question, Emily.
That is a really good one.
So we're going to skip to the next one. No, I'm just
well,
Shawn, what's your initial thought?
I think my initial thought is, because I actually did some thinking about this when I read the new Beren and Lúthien volume last year. Yeah. And I don't know that I have a good answer, but I can kind of, fumble around a little bit and we'll see what we come up with. I think that there was, in addition to the, sort of Edith's father as Thingol, I think just the whole quest of the Silmaril, Beren accepting the quest of the Silmaril, I think you could probably see a parallel in Father Francis Morgan's forbidding of him, courting a Protestant. He had his own hoops that he needed to jump through to satisfy his own guardian. and I think he really just didn't. I think he just waited until he was 18, and I believe he actually proposed to her right as soon as he was of age. So there's that. But I think he felt like he had his own hoops to jump through. Maybe that was sort of his own quest of the Silmaril. Okay. In terms of something larger than that, we might be able to say that maybe he felt that his relationship with Edith ennobled him in a way. That sort of elvish ennoblement that is sort of a theme throughout the Legendarium. But I don't know. That's a really, really interesting and tough one.
That is a tough one. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much he saw himself as Beren as much as he saw her as Lúthien. I mean, if there's a possibility to make one, to make her Lúthien without him making him necessarily Beren, but the only thing
maybe it's just the utter ordinariness of it. Yeah, of him. Maybe the idea that
humanity
he was
versus
just
the
guy,
elvish,
and she was, he saw her as something greater than himself.
So far above, so far above.
I mean, certainly there's a lot of parallels with her and Lúthien.
Yes, that's true.
The dancing in the hemlocks and all that stuff. But maybe it is just the complete ordinariness of Beren that we're meant to see. Beren was an orphan, so there's also that. Beren's father was gone. His mother was gone, and he was just sort of wandering in the woods when he found her. Maybe, although he's never actually put anything in writing about how that paralleled his own life, maybe we can just see sort of what his mindset was when he met her as a very young man. And obviously, she had an effect on him because he spent years pursuing her or wanting to pursue her. And then married her as soon as he could, and then they spent the rest of their lives together. So I don't know if I can point to any specific events, but I definitely think that the story teaches us something about how he felt about her and how he felt about himself.
There's absolutely no doubting that the level of commitment.
Yeah. I mean, as for Lúthien's fate after death, and the potential loss if she converted from Protestantism to Catholicism, that's interesting.
I have never thought of it from that perspective.
I've never ever thought of it that way,
and I don't know that he would, because I think he would see that as being converting from a false religion to a true one. I mean, he had there was no love lost between him and Lewis, for example, on the fact that Lewis, when he converted to Christianity, chose to become Anglican.
That's true, but also remember that he saw Lúthien's death and her fate, escaping from the circles
That's true,
of the world.
as a benefit.
That was a release from bondage.
Ooh,
so it actually was a good thing for her to be released beyond the circles of the world. So maybe there is something of that. She found Catholicism. She found the true path.
Well, we've one of our listeners actually wanted to pipe in here, maybe give us a little help. Sharat, what do you have to say on this one?
So I just wanted to chime in and say, it was really interesting hearing Emily go through the kind of parallels that she'd found in Edith's life and in Lúthien's story, but I don't know that the whole conceit is as the metaphor is as worked over to be an allegory. So in an allegory, like, we have to be able to map everything back to some other idea that we can extricate out of it, right? And although
everything has to have a one-to-one correspondence.
Exactly, and although Tolkien certainly might have drawn on those circumstances to inspire those parts of the story, I'm not sure that makes it an allegorical moment in his Legendarium.
That's fair.
And maybe that is part of it too. Is he? Tolkien always stressed applicability, not allegory.
Exactly.
There are individual moments of symbolism,
and there are degrees
of
that. I mean, the more applicable something is, the closer to allegory it seems to be. Emily, I'm going to go and unmute you. Have we come close at all to answering what you've proposed to us?
Yes, I was just curious what you would have to say, and I can definitely hear what Sharat was saying about whether is it a one-for-one allegory or not. The only reason I looked at this like this is because Tolkien himself said, she was my Lúthien, and he did put the names on the gravestones, and it just seems like he said, no, this doesn't happen. Well, except for here,
except for this.
So
and there are a few other things where he would point out, like the
there's things like the dead marshes.
That's what I was thinking.
Like
the land right in front
clearly symbolic of
the trench warfare and the Battle of the Somme with all the pockmarked artillery landings, and
I do think that Beren and Lúthien probably has more points of comparison, even if it doesn't rise to the level of straight allegory.
Sure.
I think there are a lot of points that you can connect. But maybe that's exactly why he was warning us not to look too deep for allegory, because then we start,
then we want to find allegories everywhere. It's true.
Yeah.
That's just how we work. That was an excellent question, Emily. Thank you so much. Shawn, I know you saw all the hands go up. Who was the next one in line?
Well, I think our next one up is Tamsin.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and unmute you, Tamsin. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. First of all, thank you for doing this. I wish we could meet all of everybody in the
would
chat
that
room
be fun?
tonight. I just think we would be fast friends, all of us, if we could just meet each other. But this is so wonderful
Agreed.
in this virtual world to find our tribe, right?
Yes, it is.
So,
Definitely.
okay. The question is, I need a little bit of a preface for it. So I think we can agree that the Lord of the Rings is universal in its appeal. And so whether you're a Buddhist or a Christian or agnostic, atheist, we all share these values that we find in these books.
Yes.
And we know that Tolkien was a devout Catholic, but when I read Lord of the Rings for the first time 42 years ago, I know, I'm so old.
You were like 3 when you read it? I'm impressed.
I'm so much older than everybody else. Anyway, when I read it 42 years ago, I didn't know that he was devout. I thought it was just a heartbreakingly sad and absolutely wonderful story. And I may have been a dummy, but I didn't think it was an obviously Christian book like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Which is a blatant allegory.
Yeah, as soon as I was reading that,
yeah,
I was super disappointed. That as it slowly dawned on me that, hey, this is an allegory.
Aslan is Jesus.
Yeah.
And Tolkien had the same complaint about it.
He didn't like something that was that in your face. Yeah.
I felt like I was being bullied, right? Anyway, so I love C.S. Lewis aside.
Yes.
But The Lord of the Rings doesn't seem an overtly religious work, although I have found it to be a book that I constantly return to for consolation and inspiration and courage, as one would do in the scriptures. And so anyway, I was reminded recently of a quote I had heard a long time ago in one of the letters Tolkien wrote, where he says that the books were fundamentally religious and a Catholic work. And so I was wondering, in what ways is this a fundamentally religious work or a moral work? Because it's hidden. I mean, it's kind of hidden.
Oh, yeah.
It's not obvious. So
that's a good question.
How does he imbue this book with his faith? I mean, does he what does he consider the highest good or the greatest evils or the moral compass of the book?
That is an excellent question. I think one thing we've learned over the course of our, 2.5 years of doing the show is that with the letters, and I think we have to credit Dr. Flieger, as well as who was the other one who pointed out? It might have been John Garth. It might have been Professor Drought.
I believe John Garth and Michael Drought
mentioned
both
that when it comes
to
to the letters, you really have to take into consideration his audience. And in that particular letter, when he talked about it being a fundamentally Christian work, or a fundamentally Catholic work, I believe he said, he was speaking to the owner of a Catholic bookstore who had written, I'm trying to find the letter right now, actually.
That was the Peter Hastings had written to him, and he had
that's right.
A lot of theological questions, and I think he actually even asked some questions about things like elvish immortality and the suggestion of reincarnation and things like that. And I think that there was an element of, how do you write this stuff if you are a Catholic?
Right.
And I think
he was concerned about the reincarnation. Because Tolkien had mentioned that in a conversation. He'd actually, mistakenly used the word reincarnation, which we now understand to mean something, radically different than from what most people would mean by that word. So he talked about in the letter, in fact, by the way, I should also point out that the letter was just a draft, that he did talk about the book being a fundamentally Christian work or a fundamentally Catholic work. And I'm trying to find the actual phrase here if I can.
I have
my books.
Your letters
but it's a longer letter than I thought it was.
I would also add, while you're looking for that, Alan, that Professor Verlin Flieger actually has basically 1.5 essays devoted to this topic in her new book. There Would Always Be a Fairy Tale. She has some stuff on just the different ways to read the letters, and also she gets specifically into the question of Christianity in the legendarium.
Yeah. And actually, I'm thinking of 2 different letters here. now that I think about it, because the letter that has the quote we're thinking of is not the letter to Peter Hastings. It's actually the letter to Father Robert Murray. But again, same idea of recognizing your audience. That was one where Father Robert Murray, close friend of the Tolkien family, had read part of it and had sent Tolkien comments and criticism. He was the one who compared Galadriel to the Virgin Mary and all of this kind of stuff. So
that's right, yeah.
When he wrote back, Tolkien said, "The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work." That's the quote that I think everybody really has some, is trying to come to grips with. Well, how is it that if the book isn't even an allegory for Christianity the way, say, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is? As Tolkien goes on in that letter, he talks about how it was unconscious at first, but in the revision it was more conscious, and that's specifically why he didn't put in references to anything like real-world religion. For him, that Christianity and Catholicism element was absorbed into the story. So it's, what would you say, Shawn? There's really not any sort of point that you would say, well, that's, Christianity and that's...
No, I mean, I think I would also point to letter 151, where he talks about wanting to create a mythology that has all the sort of the pagan elements, right, the many gods with a little g and all that stuff. But that was, and I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but that was compatible with someone who believes in the Trinity.
Yeah, that could be believed by somebody who believes in the Trinity.
Yeah. So I think he's basically trying to create all the trappings of a pagan mythology, but still have a core that is compatible with Christianity without actually having any specifically Christian elements.
Right.
I would also say when Tolkien says it's a fundamentally Catholic work, I think it just occurred to me as you use that word, Alan, we need to be really mindful of how Tolkien uses words. And Tolkien knows that the word fundamental etymologically just means at its base.
Right. In essence, at deep down.
Right. Deep down at the base. And so he could, when he says that, he might mean it very literally as saying, well, I am a Catholic and I started from a Catholic base, but then I put other things on top of it to make it more applicable to a broader worldview. I think that might be what he means when he says fundamental.
Because referencing 151 is important, not only because it's our favorite letter.
Of course it is. It was my idea.
But because he talks about why he didn't make it specifically blatantly Christian. I mean, he didn't say that directly, but he pointed out that the fault in the Arthurian mythology was that it was too closely tied to the Christian religion.
Right.
And that made it unsuitable for a general mythology for England. So, but I do see a couple of hands raised, and I want to go ahead and get to Tim and to Christopher. We're going to try Tim first. Tim?
Just to extend a little bit of the conversation that you're bringing up, I think about the whole last passages on fairy stories where he discusses the eucatastrophe, and he really talks about how the joy that you get out of the joyous ending comes from I think he calls it like a glimpse at the real truth, which in his mind is the Evangelium, the Gospels, and so I would see in his perspective that whether you as a reader understand or not, you're touching on the truths that he finds foundational to his idea of the Gospels. Now, you may come at your life perspective in a completely different tangent than he did, but I think he would say, well, from his perspective, you're what you're finding meaningful is the same is based on a sense of truth that he sees as best defined by the Catholic Church. In his perspective,
right, and from his mindset, that's a universal truth, even if the reader comes from a different perspective, and therefore it echoes true to everybody, even if they don't share that same worldview. So excellent point. I'm going to go ahead and mute you and unmute Christopher. Christopher, can you hear me?
All right. Well, when I think about this question, the moments from the texts of Lord of the Rings and even The Hobbit that come to me are the moments of grace, the moments when a character who in any rational world would, for instance, stab Gollum in the back, would, for instance, not be able to overlook the obvious treachery of the creature that just tried to run away even when he said he wouldn't, and is able to So Bilbo and Frodo both exhibit these moments of just grace that is inspiring to anybody, whether you are of a Christian persuasion or not. These moments of forgiveness and rising above and empathy. Now I do see him, I do pity him. And if you look later in the Two Towers, there's that incredible moment on the stairs of Cirith Ungol where Sam almost gets there. Yeah. Almost. If he had woken 15 seconds sooner and seen what was happening, or if he had woken 15 seconds later, or something like that. But there's this moment, it's that climactic moment that we all, it really breaks your heart every time you read it. And Bilbo and Frodo's grace obviously has this eucatastrophic outcome. Frodo's, as you can draw that line more directly, because I suppose Bilbo's, well, no, because the moment of Bilbo's grace comes after the out of Solo and into the assimilation perspective of the Hobbit. So even then, you're beginning to fill in that backstory, because in the original of Chapter 5, if I remember correctly, of course there is no such moment. Right. So all this is a long-winded way of saying, I guess for me, I would point to the concept of grace as probably the highest, or one of the highest embodiments, both of Christian faith and of the morality and compassion of these deeply decent characters.
That's some good insight, Christopher. Thank you. Yeah,
I think so. And
grace is a good point.
And I think that's what he means when he says it has those values at its core.
Right.
It doesn't have to get into it
doesn't get into doctrinal details,
or the theological details, the metaphysical concerns of Catholicism. In fact, when he started to lean in that direction later in life, he wrote the Athrbeth Finrod Andreth, which is a fascinating work. It's an excellent work. It also represents the one time he came really close to having an overt reference to Christianity in the Legendarium. And he actually had some concerns about it. I think there is something in the notes that says he was concerned about making it a parody of Christianity.
Yeah.
So he wanted to avoid. I think he had multiple reasons for wanting to avoid getting too explicit.
Yeah.
With Christian doctrine.
And you touched on one there. I think that innate humility, where he didn't want to be to be seen as even trying to make this point. He says that a little bit in the epilogue. To On Fairy Stories. He even says that it's a serious and dangerous matter. It is presumptuous of me to touch upon such a theme. So he knows this is a really high risk area, and I'm treading on thin ice here, but I'm going to try and do my best. And he does, of course, talk about it at length in that epilogue, On Fairy Stories. Certainly well worth reading if that's an area that you are interested in. Regardless, again, of your particular perspective. Tamsin, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. All right, fire away.
Thank you so much. And I totally agree that it carries universal truths for everybody. I find it incredibly inspiring. One more question then. Has it been a guide for you at all?
I like that. That's a good, has it been wow, Shawn, that's a deeply personal question, but it's a good one, and I think it's well worth asking. I can start out and say, of course, that it does. I mean, I share a similar, if not identical, worldview to Professor Tolkien in that case. So for me, it was easy to kind of see those themes and to be inspired. For me, realizing the nature of a eucatastrophe, the nature of the sovereignty of God, those are the kinds of things that it really helped me to think on, to consider more closely, and realizing that the paradox between free will and the music, if you want to call it that, I think that really is something that I've taken a lot of inspiration from. But of course, that's because I share that worldview. Now, Shawn, I know you don't, but you've still drawn plenty of inspiration from this.
Absolutely.
What say you?
Yeah, I mean, as a person who does come at it from a different worldview from Tolkien's, I still find that there's a moral core there that I share. There is a lot there that I share, and I do draw a great deal of inspiration from even some of Tolkien's most overtly religious figures, like a certain mariner with a star on his brow, who travels to the Undying Lands. That the story of hope that's there is profoundly inspirational to me. So much of Frodo's journey. There are definitely some medieval let's say, medieval Christian allegorical references. Although the story itself is not allegory, I think Tolkien was referencing some medieval Christian allegories in what he wrote of Frodo's journey.
You're thinking there's a little bit of Pilgrim's Progress in there?
Pilgrim's Progress and things like that. Yep, exactly. So I think I definitely draw a lot of inspiration from that. And just in general, I think there is a lot in Tolkien's characters and in the values that Tolkien puts into his work that I think we can all learn from.
I agree.
And these are, I say sometimes these are the stories that I want to tell my kids and that I want my kids to learn from.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an element of that there.
Wholeheartedly. Good stuff.
Cool. Thank you, Tamsin.
Well, that was an excellent question, Tamsin. Thank you for asking something that really makes us ponder, and I hope also makes the rest of our listeners ponder as well. Shawn, do you happen to recall the third hand that was raised?
Yes. Next up, we've got Sharat.
Sharat.
So I just wanted to tack on one thing to Tamsin's question that I found interesting.
Please do.
Years ago, I did an independent study in my senior year of undergrad, trying to write about how on fairy stories was a way to understand Tolkien's work. That Tolkien was the best way. Tolkien's own critical writing was the best way to understand him.
Yes.
And one of the sources I came across was this book by a scholar named Nicholas Boyle, I believe. And the book was called Sacred and Secular Scriptures. And one of the things Dr. Boyle talks about is how one of the things that makes Lord of the Rings a fundamentally Catholic work is those pagan elements you're referencing, because it's with the Protestant, with the Anglican Church's birth that the fairies left English life. There's lots of references in early modern English literature where that's where fairies start to disappear from the countryside. That's where that fear comes from.
Interesting. When Catholicism goes away and
exactly, because medieval Christianity, medieval Islam, all of them were quite happy to have genies and pagan beliefs.
That's true.
Right.
They were assimilated in some way.
Syncretistic approach to.
Yeah. Right.
So, anyways,
that's an interesting insight. Yeah.
That is interesting. And, I think one more thing that I think about as you say that, Sharat, is, the idea that Tolkien was heavily influenced by Beowulf. And Beowulf was a poem that is about pagans, but that is written by a Christian poet.
Right.
Exactly.
And much of the way that story is presented by the poet is it is looking through a Christian lens on that pagan world. And so there's I think the poet, generally speaking, avoids any judgment of the characters, and I think Tolkien is trying to do the same thing. I think that could very well have been his primary inspiration for wanting to create a pre-Christian secondary world.
Right.
I think pre-Christian is the best way to say it, as opposed to pagan, when we're talking about Middle Earth. But I don't know. I don't know that I have anything else to say on it. But as you said that, Sharat, I thought of that. I think just because I've been reading some of Tom Shippey's stuff, and he talks a lot about the Beowulf stuff.
Yeah, and it's cool because Dr. Boyle came upon that point without even really considering Tolkien's views on Beowulf, which is cool. But anyways, my question comes from a passage at the end of Appendix A. It's about Gimli going off into the west with Legolas. I'll just go ahead and read that very last paragraph in Appendix A. We have heard tell that Legolas took Gimli Gloin's son with him because of their great friendship, greater than any that has been between elf and dwarf. If this is true, then it is strange indeed that a dwarf should be willing to leave Middle-earth for any love, or that the Eldar should receive him, or that the lords of the West should permit it. But it is said that Gimli went also out of desire to see again the beauty of Galadriel, and it may be that she, being mighty among the Eldar, obtained this grace for him. More cannot be said of this matter. So I guess my question is, every other situation in which Lúthien or Arwen give up their serial longevity, or Tuor ends up in Valinor, I think. Or
well, we think he
what
does,
we
right?
decided about
we
that.
think,
Some sing that he has been counted among the elves, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There seems to be an element where it's about marriage, and in Gimli's case,
It's not, right.
There is no relationship. And it's so interesting to see the suppositions that are there. So dwarves are supposedly love Middle-earth so much that they shouldn't want to leave.
Why would they leave? Right.
Right.
And why would the Eldar let Gimli stay on Tol Eressëa?
Yeah.
And then...
Talk about one of these things is not like the others.
Mostly to stick it to Feanor, I think.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And then...
See, he got some of her hair.
There you go.
That's right. And you're still stuck in Mandos.
So
Right.
I guess my question was, why do you think Gimli gets this special permission from the Eldar? From the Valar. Rather.
Good question. Wow, that is an interesting question. I think the text is hinting at Galadriel being the cause, of course, or being the authority that grants this somehow, or that persuades the Valar. And I would imagine that's what needed
definitely
to
a
happen.
suggestive it may be.
Yeah. I mean, the Valar would have had the ultimate decision-making ability here, so it would have been they decided based on Galadriel's plea.
Right.
And perhaps this was just, her way of trying to begin to reset or refresh dwarven elven relationships. I think there's this acknowledgement that Legolas and Gimli had such a close friendship that there's no reason why the elves and the dwarves couldn't kind of start over. They had a pretty terrible start. As you remember, some dwarves were hunted by the elves until they started talking. And you're sentient.
Everybody always brings up the petty dwarves, the hunting of the petty dwarves. Let it rest, folks. It was thousands of years ago.
It was. But, the dwarves and the elves have always had some issues. Thingol, I'm sure, wouldn't have really liked to see a dwarf on Tol Eressëa any more than Feanor would.
No.
Just keep the knives away from him. That's all. Just keep the knives away. But I think that there may be something there, that this is, an attempt to try to unify, to bring some unity to elves and dwarves. Maybe. I don't know. That's one thing I'm thinking. What about you?
That's a better answer than anything I can come up with. I mean, it does say, it was their friendship was greater than any that has been between elf and dwarf. I think maybe the Valar were willing to reward that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best reason I can come up with for why the Valar would reward that, is because it's an example for elf dwarf relations.
Yes.
Going forward.
Good point.
I mean, you'd think the fact that he was part of the fellowship might have something to do with it too, but then not everybody who was in the fellowship got that same grace. So
no,
I don't think that's definitely not the whole story, even if it was a factor.
No. And of course we also have to remember that just like the other members of the fellowship that did make it there, that is to say the other mortal members of the fellowship. So Frodo and Sam, Gimli would have eventually died. He still would have ended up in the halls of Mandos that are set apart for the children of Ale. So there is that. I mean, we can't think that means that he was granted immortality. He was just granted that he could spend the rest of his, mortal existence, which would now be brief, in Tol Eressëa. So, yeah, I think though you also hit on something. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that's a good answer, though. I mean, I think your answer is a really good one. But go ahead.
I think that might work, and then I think there's also an element of this appreciation for a pure platonic love. The love that he had for Galadriel it transcended the whole elf dwarf thing first. I mean, and that goes back to my first suggestion, perhaps, is for a reason. But I think also there's this element of rewarding a pure love that's a noble love. And maybe there's something there. I don't know. Because, you talked about the marriage thing and how, Lúthien and Arwen and their fates get, different, and it's because of their relationships. But those are romantic relationships, and this is different. And I think maybe it's the recognition that this kind of love is no less valid than that kind of love. So
I like that. I think that's a good answer.
Well, thank you. We've got a couple of hands popped up here. Tim, we're going to go ahead and get to you first. Tim?
Just what you were talking about also made me think of a foreshadowing potentially of the end of times, when there was this sort of questionable nature of, are the dwarves going to play a role in the final phase with the end of time, with in as far as their relationship with the music. It just seemed like it might also be a bit of a foreshadowing that the dwarves are going to be a part of the stanza of the music, I guess. for lack of better words.
Oh, that's some good insight too, no doubt. And then Emily, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you next.
We were talking in the chat, Tamsin and I, about this idea of relationship and how Legolas and Gimli are not romantically involved, but I think it is the relationship between the two of them that's exceptional. Yes, Gimli is taken with Galadriel, more than taken with Galadriel, obviously. But that got me thinking about how, and Tamsin had said, maybe being part of community or marriage or friendship is key to this ennoblement, based on love, whether it's platonic or erotic. And it seems like, yes, the ennoblement of all Iluvatar's children is not through their own needs, but through relationships with others. And then I started thinking, most of the people who succeed, the people who do well that I've come across in the Legendarium, do well not on their own, but because they are with other people. They are in fellowship with others.
Yes, absolutely.
Obviously, it's Frodo and Sam, and then we have Legolas and Gimli, Aragorn with them as well.
Turin and Beleg.
There's always one that doesn't fit
Turin, no.
That worked well. It worked well for Turin.
Yeah, it didn't
work great for Beleg.
Right, and until Beleg went away, and the people or the characters that go off and try to do things on their own and do things, become ennobled through their own power, Turin and Feanor. They don't succeed. And by the way, I am planning on making you guys a Feanor
pinata.
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, that is phenomenal. I love that.
That's know how much I want that.
That's great.
I want to respond to that because I have, for a long time now, I've been thinking about, I think everybody who listens to the show knows that I love the theme of ennoblement.
Yes.
And we always hear about it in reference to, the children that come from Beren and Lúthien or from Tuor and Idril, Aragorn and Arwen. But there is an element of ennoblement through just contact with the superior race that happens again and again throughout the Legendarium. The first thing that happened to ennoble men when they came into the West was not Beren marrying Lúthien. It was Finrod
singing to him,
meeting with Beor's people.
Absolutely.
And if you go back farther than that, the first thing that ennobled the Eldar was contact with Orome when he first found them and brought them into the West.
That's absolutely true.
Long before Elwë ever met Melian. So I do think that there's an element of ennoblement just by contact, just by friendship and fellowship with others, and that it could be that Gimli going with Legolas and being invited at the invitation of Galadriel, if you want to put it that way.
Sure.
Maybe it is a way of showing that dwarves get to be ennobled
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. That's some really good insight. And it speaks to the converse of something we talked about very early on. I want to say episode 5, when we talked about the Ainulindalë and the sins of Melkor. What was the fourth sin of Melkor? Was this self-isolation, withdrawal from community. And it really is. This is the converse of that, isn't it?
It is. And I have to say that I also just saw Tamsin type that in the chat. So I want to give her credit for bringing that up at the same time as you did.
There we go. Considers isolation one of the greatest evils. See, I can't see the chat room because my browser window is not, I have to scroll down. But I was just listening to that the other day, not because I habitually listen to our episodes, but because I wanted to hear the difference in improvement between first season and second season, kind of from a scientific perspective. And I'm listening to episode 5 going, wow, people listen to us?
I just imagine you sitting in your hot tub at home, listening to old episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast, thinking, this is the life.
I need to disabuse you of that particular notion, son. There is no hot tub around here. The only hot tub is this dry sauna I'm sitting in called a booth. But anyway.
Yeah, no kidding.
Shawn, do you remember the next hand that we saw? Was it
the next one that I've got on my list is Carolyn.
Carolyn, yeah. Carolyn, let's see if you're still able to hear us and speak to us. Can you?
Okay, yes. I do have a question.
Okay.
I was re-listening to an episode, the end of an episode, and I believe it was Maya from Michigan asked you a question regarding singing in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And I was, I thought rather deeply, well, for me, about that. And, singing, the world started with singing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's such a fundamental thing. And then I remembered that when they met Tom Bombadil, the guests became suddenly aware that they were singing merrily, as if it was easier and more natural than talking.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was so glad that she asked that question, because I thought about that. And every time I thought about it, I'd think of, another way that, your responses just were reaffirmed that, singing is central. And it's not strange that you could, have Aragorn and Legolas singing a, dirge for Boromir. That fits perfectly with that world.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Carolyn. So I'll just go ahead and recap for the folks who can't hear you. So basically, Carolyn's question is about a question we got in the mailbag from Maya a few episodes ago, Maya in Michigan, about singing in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And the question of, is this a world where spontaneous singing just happens? Yeah.
Oh, let me sing a song about Boromir, who has just died.
Right. Yeah. Right, exactly. And Carolyn just observed, this is a world that was created through song.
Yep.
Going all the way back to the Ainulindale. She also observed the fact that in the passage in the Tom Bombadil chapter, when the hobbits are with Tom, suddenly they find themselves just slipping into singing because singing becomes more natural than speaking.
Because of Tom, who speaks in song, essentially, yeah.
Right. And so it's just, sort of a comment, on the fact that this is a world that is just rich in song. It was created through song. Song does happen naturally in this world. And so it does seem like the kind of place where, sure, Aragorn and Legolas could just suddenly sing a dirge to remember Boromir.
Yeah.
It's just natural because it's part of the fabric of creation.
That's a really good insight, Carolyn. I mean, the thing is, song is part and parcel of the world of Arda because it's made from song. And so is the history of Arda made from song. So unlike our world where it really does seem impractical to think that a couple of guys would just break out in a dirge, it's a lot more possible in Tolkien's world. So, I don't think either of us touched on that when we were answering Maya's question. But boy,
I don't think we did. I think we talked a lot about medieval, medieval literary tradition and things like that. Yeah,
and the idea that songs lasted longer, and that is to say, a song was in the popular consciousness for decades rather than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
and that there was probably a standard tune that you wrote to for this kind of occasion. Followed a particular formula.
Yeah.
But you're right. I don't think we talked about the fact that, hey, anybody thinking about this, the whole world is made from music. So probably singing.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
That is a very good point. All right. Well, next up is Christopher. Christopher, can you hear me?
I can. I hope you can hear me as well.
All right. Fire away, sir.
Okay. So I want to go back to a couple episodes ago. So this is relatively recent history. When you were talking about...
good. I might remember it then.
We might actually remember. Yeah.
When you were talking about the resolution Bilbo finds between the Baggins and the Took half his personality. I'm not going to get this exactly right, but you seem to be characterizing the Took half as sort of courage and the Baggins half as wisdom. And the Took half as courage makes, that's of course that's very easy. It's very easy to draw that out with the spiders and him coming into his own in chapter 5 and all those places. Now, I would like it if you would spend some time really focusing on the wisdom half of this as exemplified by Baggins, part of his personality.
The Baggins side.
The reason I say that is because it's very easy, and I think I may have fallen prey to this tendency. It's very easy to see the fussiness, the rigidity, the the business manner, if you will, and
very much so. Yeah.
So if you would you take some time and talk about what is the wisdom of the Baggins half, other than, you know, these sayings of the amazingly well thought Bungo.
Well, you just answered the question. That's what I was going to answer. But okay, that's a good question.
I've got a little bit on this.
Before you do, I want to just kind of frame the question a little bit. Not so much frame the question, because the question was framed fine, but I want to frame our initial answer. You know, we were trying to draw that from Thorin's deathbed scene, and it was when he talked about courage and wisdom blended in measure. So it may not be a perfect fit in that sense. I mean, I think there is a lot of wisdom in the Baggins side, and sometimes not so much wisdom in the Took side. I think that's clear. But I just want to...
He's the original fool of a Took.
Exactly. But I do want to say that that's where we got that from. It might have been, you know, had Thorin said courage and comfort, you know, that might have been a more easy connection to make. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the courage and wisdom, we just kind of leapt straight from that to Took and Baggins and analogized those. There are plenty of wisdom bits though, and that's where I'm going to go ahead and let you jump in, Shawn. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And I think we actually, although folks haven't heard it as of recording tonight, we actually did touch on this in episode 87 a little bit. So by the time this comes out, folks will have had a chance to hear us talk a little bit about the balance between Took and Baggins.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
One of the things that we landed on is the Baggins is a bit more careful.
Yes,
much more careful.
Risk averse. Risk averse is the phrase I was thinking.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think the Baggins tends to rely. I don't think we said this, but I think the Baggins tends to rely more on sort of inherited wisdom, passed down wisdom, which is a very Hobbity kind of thing, and Chapter 5 speaks to that specifically. All the sayings and things that have come down. But we also see that it is the Baggins side that that keeps the Took side in check, partly through his own his fear and his distance from the world that he's thrust into when Gandalf and the dwarves show up. Mm-hmm. I think actually kind of forces him to take a step back sometimes and look at things before jumping into things. And that when he stops and thinks about the situation before moving or before acting, I think that's when the Baggins side is in control, as opposed to the Took side that tends to just kind of jump in there and riddle and go crazy and stab spiders and things like that.
Spider stabbing. Yeah.
So I think it's partly a function of the fact that he's just more careful, mm-hmm. and there's some wisdom in that.
Prudent.
But I think
prudent is
a good word. And I think also the Baggins side has just a sense of the way things ought to be. That maybe we didn't talk about as much in episode 87.
I don't think we talked about that much at all, but you're right.
I don't think we did, but we talked about things like giving the Arkenstone to Bard and the Elven King is a Bagginsy thing to do because he's just trying to avoid trouble. That's wise.
Yeah.
I don't know if he necessarily does it for the wise reason. I don't know if he does it because it's, the wise thing to do, or if he just does it because he feels like it's the right thing to do. But I feel like there's some wisdom there. There's a very sort of down to earth Hobbit wisdom in that.
Down to earth, another good way of putting it. Yeah.
What Sam might call Hobbit sense.
Exactly. Hobbit sense.
And I think that's partly it.
Yeah. I think it is.
I don't know if you've got anything else.
I don't know that I have anything else because you said just about everything I was going to say. I do think, though, Christopher touched on it when he said, other than the inherited wisdom and the fund of wise sayings that he had, I think the fund of wise sayings that he had is exactly one of the reasons he was the Baggins side is so wise. I don't want to discount that in any way because, like you mentioned, inherited wisdom is a big part of the Baggins side. And I think inherited wisdom is certainly no less wise, just for its inherited nature.
Yeah.
So, I would agree. Just by piping in those extra words like risk averse and prudent.
Yeah.
But it has to be the balance, because if it's all Baggins, then you don't get the bravery. The two have to be in balance.
The two have to be in balance, and I think we both celebrated the Tookish moments a lot early on. I don't think we ever celebrated the Baggins moments that much early on. And maybe the book is just constructed that way.
Yeah.
The book is constructed that way that early on you see the emergence of the Took as a victory for Bilbo. But then later in the book, you start to see when the Baggins comes back and he balances it out a little bit. That's the true victory for him.
Yeah, and I think the wisdom does show up more as the story progresses. Emily had something to say. She just mentioned it in chat, but that she thinks that he was prudent before the journey. The wisdom came from his learning how to function in the world outside of the Shire. So, good stuff.
Maybe the prudence could come from inherited wisdom, but true wisdom had to come from experience.
Yeah. Well, you can only know what you experience. There is that. So,
right.
All right. Well, I think Mark's next.
So, in the Fellowship, in A Long Expected Party, Bilbo is in the process of giving a speech, and he welcomes the Sackville Bagginses back at long last to Bag End. And then he has that little wordplay thing that he says, I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Now, doing the fractions, I believe that he's leaving out that small portion, the less than half, the remainder, and that's the Sackville Bagginses that deserve less liking than Bilbo is already giving them. So I don't know. What's your opinion? Do you think that Bilbo is being disingenuous with his welcome that he made just a couple of pages before, or is it just a little bit of wordplay and word nerdery from Bilbo, and that he's glad they're there?
I really like that question, and it's a very interesting question because it really requires us to parse that line about half of you and half and blah, blah, blah. So let's look at that line first. Okay, Shawn, let's look at that. We've got, let me go through it again. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. So let's start with that first line.
So Mark, I just want to make sure Mark is saying that the SBs are
He's saying
the last part of that.
He's saying that the last part of it, but that he's. I think there's actually this is why it was important to parse this, because the actual question. I know the double negatives. So many double negatives.
So half of them are the ones that he doesn't know half as well as he should like, and then less than half of that remaining, well, I guess, 40-something percent are the ones that he likes half as well as they deserve.
71 or less.
And then there's another, few percent that are the SBs, which deserve
exactly the amount of like he got.
Okay.
I think what happens is there's a little bit of confusion because of the phrase. So let's start with the first one because that's the easy one. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like. So in theory, what that means is there are 72 people there that he would like to have known better, right?
Right.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like. In other words, I would have liked to have known 72 of you at least, maybe more, much, much better than I know you. So that's the easy
72
part.
people, I wish I knew you better.
Right.
That's what he's saying.
But the second half is the one that I think the double negatives throw everybody off a little bit. And I think that actually might have happened here. I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. So let's take, I like less than half of you. So that means we're looking at least 70 or at most 71 people.
71 or fewer people.
Somewhere between 1 and 71. But he likes them.
That he likes half as well as they deserve.
Half as well as they deserve.
They're better people than he gives them credit.
Exactly. What he's saying is they actually deserve for him to like them twice as much.
Right.
And that, I think, is the confusion because it sounds like an insult. And in fact, several of the Hobbit people are trying to work it out whether that was an insult or not. So it's half as well as you deserve. There's at least one, and maybe as many as 71 of you, that I should like at least twice as much as I do. Are the Sackville Bagginses?
Some others.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, that's.
No, I mean, you got to figure in probably the Sackville Bagginses are part of, because in that remaining group, the ones that don't deserve to be liked twice as much, they deserve to be liked exactly as much as Bilbo likes them. Right. So that probably ranges from Frodo, whom he adores and who deserves to be adored, to the Sackville Bagginses who he doesn't like and don't deserve to be liked. So, there's probably, let's say, maybe a dozen or so of those.
Sure.
I'm just throwing out a number.
I know, we're just making up numbers now because that's where we're at in the show. We're pure speculation mode.
That's hilarious, though.
Really
I'm sure
is.
the SBs are in that group because, they definitely, he's saying, I don't like you and I don't, you deserve exactly the treatment you get from me, basically, is what he's telling everybody from the Sackville Bagginses to Frodo. But then there's that other group, isn't there? The ones that deserve to be liked twice as much. I like the fact that you've parsed that out. Now, Bilbo is admitting, I don't really like you people, but you're probably okay.
You're probably okay.
I
should probably like you better than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Bilbo saying, "Look, I haven't been the nicest person. I haven't liked all of you the way you deserve. Half of you,
well,
less than half of you, I like half as well as you deserve."
And to be fair, he came back having experienced a lot of stuff that they can't possibly understand.
Oh no, of course.
We talk about that a lot with Frodo, or we haven't, because we haven't really talked about that yet. But you see a lot of critical discussion of Frodo, the fact that Frodo comes back so changed that he just can't relate to anybody anymore. Bilbo comes back the same. He comes back changed to such a degree. Yeah. It's not quite as damaging to him.
No.
It's not nearly as damaging to him. He comes back.
Well, at least not at first.
Improved.
You keep putting on that ring, though.
True. That's true.
Yeah.
He comes back generally improved, at least in the short term,
and certainly in the material sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and just generally, but I guess what I would say is he still doesn't relate to those people, and so part of it is not just that he's a crotchety old man, but it's also that he can't really relate to them anymore.
That's a good point.
And maybe he just can't really appreciate.
And he realizes that and says, "Well, some of you,
the simple Hobbit stuff anymore.
You deserve for me to have liked you better, and I didn't."
Mm-hmm.
But that number's 71 or less. So it definitely is some incredible wordplay by Bilbo, by Tolkien as Bilbo in that particular moment. And I'm sure there's probably some Tolkien in that where he realizes there's a lot of people that he probably should have liked better.
I'm sure.
Sharat,
which of us doesn't feel that way sometimes?
Exactly. Sharat has something to say here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Sharat.
Yeah. So your parsing was very helpful. I've never actually gone through it that way to make it clear to myself, but I think the way I've always read it is that there's all the double negatives that make it confusing, but then that Bilbo's not just being a crotchety old man or he's admitting his faults. I think he's actually being quite nasty at this moment to the hobbits, because the entire party is a kind of nasty joke on everyone.
Well, yeah, the one gross thing.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know though. I mean,
well, there's probably an element of him using this language because he knows they won't understand it.
You're right. There is a condescension to this for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously they spend some time trying to figure it out.
Well,
and
right.
He knows exactly what he's trying to say. He knows that he can insult a big portion of them and then never really figure it out.
And yet I don't think
so.
Yet when we parse it, we realize he's not insulting anybody. This is a compliment. He's saying, "There's a bunch of you out here, half of you, that I wish I knew better, right? And there's another little less than half of you that I've not liked as well as I should." It's not so much a double negative. It's words like half of you, half as well,
right?
Less than half of you, half as well. Very confusing. So it's not so much that they contradict each other. You just have to understand that the in each of those pairs of halves, the first half is identifying the quantity of people, and the second half has to do with how he treats them. Either he doesn't know them well enough or he doesn't like them well enough. So I don't, but I do see the condescension for sure.
I do think Sharat has a point though about just messing with them.
Oh yeah. The condescension, I know what I'm saying. You're not gonna be able to figure this out because you're a bunch of bumpkins. Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt there.
And I guess an element of what I was saying was, the literal meaning once you parse out his sentence is not insulting necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
but I
see
think
what you
that
mean,
he's ironically saying that what he means is counter to what he has said. Because, well, he could have liked them half as well as they deserve, but he didn't.
Right.
He didn't do that.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's a very good point, actually. That's a very good point.
That is true. The fact that they deserve to be liked more than he likes them doesn't mean that he wishes he did.
Yeah, you're right.
That much.
You're right. And I think there is. Yeah. I was getting caught up on the literality, the literal meaning of the words, which of course is not an insult, but he's right. There's an ironic nature to this, that it's not just condescending. It's basically telling you, I don't like you. There's a bunch of you that, you probably deserve to be liked more, but no. That can't be asked.
And I would say that Christopher has pointed out in the chat that there has been a whole lot of wine consumed at this point.
That is a very good point.
So we probably need to give that more credit
yeah.
than we usually do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. James, you're up.
Okay, well, I'm going to do one little quick comment real quick, and then I got a softball question for you.
We like those.
Yay!
Okay, so quick comment is it's actually believed. You also were speaking about Beowulf earlier, how it's a Christian poem, but it's kind of based in pagan lands and with some pagan people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a retelling of a pagan myth, but by a Christian poet. Yeah,
it's actually believed because they use a lot of Christian language, and they occasionally say, "Oh, praise God" and things like that in the story. But there's some belief that it was. Well, not belief, almost confirmation that it was originally a pagan story, and that, for example, Grendel was originally a troll rather than just a weird monster.
Okay.
Going by early Germanic and Norse mythology, and the dragon at the end of the story was actually supposed to be based on Fafnir, and then rather than spewing or rather than breathing fire, it actually spewed poison or venom, which was more traditional for the Germanic style dragons. A fire-breathing Germanic dragon is a more Christianized version. Having said that, Alan, I believe it was.
But that is interesting that you say that, especially about Grendel, because that's something that I don't remember Beowulf that well. I should.
It's been a little.
I don't
while
know it half as well as I should like. But I do remember that Grendel, and that is he's described as a descendant of Cain.
Yeah.
And so there's a very Christian.
Yeah, you're definitely right. You're on the right track, James. It's when we've mentioned that Christian take on it, it's definitely a retelling of an ancient pagan myth by at that time, contemporaneous modern poet who happens to be Christian and telling it. More importantly, less important than the faith of the poet is the faith of his audience, and he is writing it for a Christian audience. So he is adapting an old pagan myth for Christian times. In a newly Christianized, Anglo-Saxon world. But so go ahead now that we've got the
good clarifications there.
The ground laid properly, the groundwork done. James, what's the actual question?
So this is my softball. It doesn't really have anything to do with that, but
nice.
Alan, I believe you used to play Lord of the Rings online.
I did. I still actually have a character on there, actually several, but I very rarely get a chance to get on. I will say, however, that we do now have a Prancing Pony Podcast kinship on the Landreval server. So, reach out to us on the page if you're interested in that.
Absolutely. If I get a chance to get back on again. But my question's actually, what is your favorite storyline or quest line that you may have done?
Oh, goodness. Now, keep in mind, when I stopped playing regularly, the Mirkwood expansion had just come out. It was the first Mirkwood expansion. I hesitated because there was a more recent Northern Mirkwood that's come out that's like very high level, but the Mirkwood expansion had just come out.
Southern Mirkwood expansion, that was I think that was part of Rise of Isengard, I think.
That sounds about right, because it was Isengard was next. So that was several years ago, so it's been a while, but I'm trying to remember some of those storylines. I love the Ranger stuff. When helping the Rangers accomplish things that the ranger there, I can't remember his name now, that lived just north of Bree, and he sent you on a bunch of different missions. The Rangers that were stationed up at Numinous, and
Numinous was my favorite zone.
Yeah, that was definitely, I really enjoyed that a lot. It's such a rich story, the whole thing. Even the side missions have a lot of really rich story to them. The world has
little chestnuts hidden in different places.
Yeah, there really are. There are a ton of little pieces hidden here and there. Really is. And, you just get past the fetch quests and things like that, and you start looking at it, and it's a lot of fun. Definitely hoping to get back into it, and we had a great time talking with Professor Drought about that. Actually, a pretty good lengthy chunk of our interview.
I keep hearing that it is it's just such a faithful adaptation.
You can tell that they cared. There's a lot of attention to detail. And the environments are really stunning in that regard. They're no longer graphically modern by any stretch. The engine's old, and it shows. But it's certainly I think it's beautiful. But it's beautiful in a different way than you might expect.
It's beautiful because you're transported to Middle Earth.
Exactly, you really are.
Yeah.
Some of those moments, especially early on, as you wander through the lone lands, or as you get to the last ford, or the last bridge, and then you get to the ford. I mean, it just feels right.
Excellent. Absolutely. Yeah. The very early editions, expansions were very close to important parts in the books. And
yes,
they were very true to the lore even. Like, for example, a lot of MMOs, they use, magic to heal you, whereas in Lord of the Rings Online, they use like the minstrel plays a song, and suddenly you're more emboldened and more willing to keep fighting because they use morale.
Or a captain can shout a particular cry that will restore your morale. Yeah,
which is very much more along the lines of the Lord of the Rings mythos rather than a traditional RPG.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very they really try to be lore faithful, and I've enjoyed it. I really wish that I could get back into it to the extent that I'd like, but unfortunately, time. Shawn and I can tell you, we put a little more time into the show than we ever thought we would.
Truly, and honestly, I would love to have the time to play it, because I have never done so. But I have played MMOs in the past. It's been many years.
Evercrack, Evercrack. Yeah.
EverQuest, the original EverQuest back in like 2000 to, I don't know, maybe 2003 or something. That was my time for MMOs.
Did you have to use a dial-up modem then, Shawn?
I did have a dial-up for a little while, yeah. EverQuest was the reason I got DSL back in like 2000, 2001. Yep. But
that's awesome.
Yeah,
stuff.
I don't see myself having time to play it soon, but maybe someday.
I know, me neither, unfortunately. But hopefully again one of these days. Hopefully they'll still be around in 6 years or so when the show's done, and I can spend time again.
Hope so.
All right. Well, I think the last question you said it was Tim, right? Was the only hand that we've not seen.
That's right.
Welcome, Tim. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
These have been great contributions tonight.
Oh, well, thank you. I think our contributions have been equaled by everybody in the audience tonight. We've had some really great insights, I think, and just made for a really great conversation.
Agreed.
One of the things I'd written a little email to Alan back a week or two ago was just commenting on how important the balances that in life are, the willingness to explore, but the need to be able to come home, or the ability to be open to people of different backgrounds, versus just being afraid of the other, or judging the other harshly, for being different or foreign. And how at the same time there's different perspectives, like you said, being wary of others is not necessarily inherently bad, or being overbold can have its own problems. And just the way that the different ways these different life lessons seem to be played out, it was to me something that I always found meaningful, and when I come back to it, it makes me feel like grateful, and I'm taking things away when I reflect on it. And I also find, I guess one of the comments questions I wanted to make is, do you ever find yourself pausing periodically and just thinking about the other meta narrative of this being Bilbo writing later on in life, and being transposed to through shared story over time, and updated from like you talked about some of the things where it was updated through intervening years, and maybe some of the touches of things are a little bit different than originally there. And I think even but like I guess it spoke to me, for example, when he talked about commenting in the very end of the story about how he was judged as odd and different, and there's a sort of it seems to be in my head when I read that, a sort of a gist that of sort of a sense of a little bit of a pain in there, and acceptance and knowledge that it was okay that he's now different, but also a sort of sense of wishing that he could. There was a way to bridge some of those gaps that are still there. I don't know,
because he can't connect to them anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess moments like that, I see all of a sudden this other layer of a story upon a story that just adds depth, and complexity to this work. Do you ever see yourself like all of a sudden pausing and thinking about that meta story as well?
That's a good question. I think we do. Yeah.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah, you have to put it in context, and the context is that frame narrative. You really do, especially anything that is Bilbo directly speaking about Bilbo. Those moments, especially at the end of the last chapter, the fact that it didn't bother him, that he really basically didn't care, that he lost the respect of everybody, and I think that maybe really in turn does kind of fuel that line that Mark was asking about, that we see in The Lord of the Rings about liking people half as well as they deserve. There is a little bit of that. But what do you think, Shawn?
Yeah, I agree. I find myself thinking about the frame narrative a lot, increasingly more these days.
Yeah.
I find myself going back to the history of Middle-earth for insight into how Tolkien might have actually wanted to include more of a frame narrative with the Silmarillion than we end up getting in what's published
right outside of the histories of Middle Earth.
Yeah, which is a bigger topic than I think we can really dive into right now.
Certainly.
But I think that you can see there's a lot of Tolkien himself in Bilbo.
Yes,
which is not to say that it's allegorical, but I think that as Tolkien is writing about this character who saw this world of Middle Earth and tried to write about it. I think Tolkien sort of identified with that to some degree. I wouldn't say entirely, but definitely to a degree, as he was sort of the person who saw this secondary world and decided to write about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And I do think that when we see those moments of those moments when you're able to step back, whether it's the very end of The Hobbit or whether it's the note on the Shire records from the prologue to Lord of the Rings. I really love those moments. And I feel like you can see a little bit of Tolkien.
I think you're right. Yeah. Peeking through a little bit.
A little bit of peeking through a little bit. And I think sometimes apologizing a little bit for what he's created, and sometimes not apologizing at all, saying this is what I've done, take it or leave it. So I don't know if that answers the question, Tim, but I definitely find myself thinking about that frame narrative a lot. And I would say that there are characters throughout the Legendarium that echo Tolkien in different ways, whether it's somebody like Aule as a sub-creator or Bilbo as just a writer. So yeah.
Well, great discussion, everyone. Thank you. I mean, really, thank you all for joining us tonight for Questions After Nightfall. We hope that each of you can join us again for the next one, which will probably take place in September. And folks listening at home, we hope you will all join us again next week for a very special episode.
Yeah, I want to just, first of all, echo Alan's thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thanks to everybody listening. I hope that everyone listening has enjoyed this as much as we have, despite some technical issues. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. And a very special thank you to everyone in our Patreon family who have made special events like this one possible.
Absolutely. Don't forget that next week is the final episode of Season 2. That's going to be episode 90, where we'll be interviewing Dr. Verlyn Flieger about her foundational book, Splintered Light, which is an absolute must-read if you want to tackle the Silmarillion especially. Her new essay collection, There Would Always Be a Fairy Tale, and some other projects she's worked on, including the Tolkien Studies Journal and some critical editions of several of Tolkien's own works.
And then after that, we'll take a brief hiatus for a few weeks, and then we will be returning in mid-August with Season 3 and episode 91, which is going to be an interview with Dr. Tom Shippey.
Oh, my.
We're going to be talking to him about The Road to Middle-earth and J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the century, as well as a little bit of Tolkien tangential medievalism in his new book, Laughing Shall I Die? Lives and Deaths of the Great Vikings.
Absolutely. Boy, I got to tell you, talking to the two of them, that it's nerve-wracking. I mean, as nervous as I was for Corey Olsen, I'm going to be a bit more nervous for them. Yeah. These are two of our heroes for sure, so we're looking forward to that.
Absolutely, and there's going to be so much to talk about. And
we'll have to have them on more than once. There's no way we can get it all done in an hour and a half. But folks, while we are off, we will still be around on social media. Barliman will still be bringing us the mail, so keep sending in your questions to him. And most importantly, we will still be working on several things related to the podcast, all with an eye towards making things even better for Season 3 when we start the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, I think this time off is going to give us a little bit of a chance to prepare for this upcoming season more thoroughly.
Absolutely.
And we're really excited about doing that. So much so that I think that's our plan to do that from here on out between every season. We got to keep it fresh and interesting. And I think that means sometimes even Alan and I need a break to think about what comes next and, hey, a break from each other too.
You had to let that out, No,
I did.
Well, folks, if you have any questions about, the start of season 3 or our hiatus or anything like that, just let us know on social media or by emailing Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
And while we're not going to ask you for anything, if you'd like to see how we're doing towards our Patreon goals, you can see them at patreon.com/prancingponypod.
Well, of course, we also want to give our usual very special shout out to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier, some of whom are in the virtual studio with us today. DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Dawn in Vancouver Island, and Emily in Texas. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you all so much for your support and just for the time you spend listening to us, participating in the show, participating on social media, and just making our podcast better. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you do. You make this show better. Folks, that almost wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, thank you again for joining us. And while you're waiting for our interview with Dr. Flieger, or while we're on hiatus, we invite you to please check out the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got links to everything from inexpensive paperbacks to some really good stuff for your Tolkien collection.
And if you wouldn't mind, head over to iTunes for us. Leave us a review. We'd really appreciate that. That helps us find new listeners. That means more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, maybe more guests to the next Questions After Nightfall, and all those things that make the Prancing Pony Podcast community great.
And thanks to those of you who have, by the way. Of course, we do still read every one of them, even if it's hard to believe what they say, but we do read them. And we're featuring one a week on our social media networks on #ThankfulThursdays. So make sure you never miss an episode of the show by subscribing through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And thanks to everyone who's become part of our social media circles. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everybody could be a part of, and that's why we have the online common room on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and also on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
There you go. And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your best questions to stump the host of the Prancing Pony Podcast to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And we'll try to get him into our next episode. Well, no matter how much time we've had, it's still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners and such excellent and admirable question askers this time. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.